All right. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's good to see you again.
I know it's a great place. We're at the TAPA conference here in Atlanta. Great turnout. Awesome.
Best turnout ever. It's our highest numbers ever.
Yeah.
400 and I think we'll round out about 412.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's big for us.
And how many officers are here?
I want to say five. Five of our officers were able to. Are you talking about police or are you
Police
talking about?
officers. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. I thought you were talking about our board
No,
officers.
Sorry.
Police officers, I think we had around 55, which is also our biggest law
Wow.
enforcement class ever. We have TAPA has the Law Enforcement Scholarship Fund that some of our bigger members have donated to and put money, not just our bigger members, but a few members have put money into that allows law enforcement to come, on full scholarship, covers their travel, their education, everything like that. So
Wow.
that's been a big help.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the coolest thing I've seen about the conference is because I know the CargoNet one in Monrovia, they have the California police there, but they're not really everywhere. And so here I saw Chicago. There's some from Memphis. I think there's some from New Jersey, Arizona, California. Am I missing any other place? Georgia, of course.
Georgia, yeah. Arizona. We have a
Arizona,
couple
yeah.
from Arizona. We have Mojave County Sheriffs from Arizona. I think that's it from AZ.
Yeah, and I just think it's super important for
Oh,
people
Buckeye PD from AZ.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I just think that's so important to make sure to have those connections so that if something does happen, you know who to call. Um, and that's why, this one's a big one.
Well, we talk about that. I mean,
Say.
I stood up in front of the room and said, the education's great. Obviously, that's one of the big things that people come for is the education and the updates, what's going on out there. But the biggest thing is if you come here and you don't walk away with at least a dozen phone numbers of people that you
Right.
think are good connections for you, then you really haven't spent your time well.
Right. I 100% agree. That was my mission last night too. Is you got to meet all the guys because you never know when you need to
Yeah.
call somebody. Well, this is I think this would be part 3 of our series. So today we're going to be talking about basically just different modes of theft.
Yep.
I know we kind of talked about the over the road strategic theft. We'll get into straight theft, and then also what I think is super interesting and something like even yesterday the BNSF guys were here talking about rail theft. That to me is super interesting just because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And then any other type of thefts that you can talk on. So
Yeah. Well, the rail theft is very complex, right? We started having really good communication with BNSF and some of the other rails as an industry. They started engaging a couple years ago, which has been great. I think before that, there hadn't been any real deliberate engagement other than the fact that JJ hosts his conference every year at the BNSF headquarters in Fort Worth, which is a great conference for everybody. You should go to that. So usually in March, it's free. It's one of the top 4 largest cargo theft summits, Southwest Transportation Security Council. Absolutely free, and it's hosted at BNSF Rail. So they've always engaged in that way, but actually coming out and speaking in the industry and talking about what's going on the rail just kind of happened the last couple of years.
yeah,
And I think they've done a really good job of being open about what they're trying to deal with.
Yeah,
And I
me
think
too.
that's I think that was a positive for them because I think people didn't realize, people like myself or like a Keith or Chuck, or we knew because we kind of always have a little more detailed knowledge than the average person, I think, because of the circles we're in. So we knew how complex it was for them to deal with, but most other people did not. And then
Yeah.
when they stand up in front of the room and talk about how, you know, these guys are stopping trains in the middle of the desert. I mean,
It blows my mind.
you're miles out in the middle of the desert. They have thousands of miles of track and they're stopping it in rough terrain. You don't really know where they're stopping it, but I think, they've continued to adapt. They talked about yesterday about some of the use of technology that they're using to spot the stuff that's kind of curbing it, everything like that. But they have a huge task, and without, how I am about not wanting to give too much
Yeah, right.
information, right, on how things are defended against. But when you can't predict where they're going to stop the train, you
Yeah.
can predict an area, like you could say, outside of Needles, California, okay, but outside of Needles, California could be hundreds of miles,
Right.
right? And you have a few officers in the region and they have to get out there in the middle of nowhere. Can they get out there in time? That's a complex problem. And these guys come fully prepared to
Yes.
get on the train, or they get on the train before it stops and they're just waiting for it to stop, right? And then they communicate their location with the rest of the crew and then the trucks come out and they just pop open the doors and they start
Yeah.
offloading the freight. Or sometimes they'll throw it next to the track, or they'll throw it in a certain area and they come back later, when the
Throw it in
train's
the
moving
brush and
again. Yep.
yeah,
And they come back and get it. It's very complex, and the rail has their work cut out for them. I mean, that's a lot of area to
it's a lot.
cover. So I think when you look at what they're doing and how they're trying to partner with the industry and how they're speaking about it, and
Mhm.
they're going to Washington, I've been to DC with several members of the rail. When I spoke I think it was the infrastructure committee that we spoke in front of a couple of members of the House and Senate on. I had 3 members of the rail
Okay.
there with me, trying to explain how complex it is. Again, I just think they've done a great job over the last couple of years of coming out and talking about it,
I agree.
which is huge. I mean, that's a big thing.
I mean, even here, whenever they were talking, they had a video of kind of like the technology that they have out there and being able to see they're watching those guys hop on
Yeah.
and scaring them to get off. One of the videos they showed how they were, dropped off with one car and then on the side of the interstate
Yep.
hopping in another one. I
And
mean,
that's
it's
and
wild.
so that's where cargo theft isn't all that different, even when you look at the mode, right? So
Right.
that's been a common thing. So, Miami-Dade task force used to show really good video of this, and a couple other different task forces, but the bad guys have always had that operandi on how to get away. So it was very common if they got caught, they would run,
Mhm.
and they would run to an overpass.
Oh,
Right, and they
interesting.
would go down the overpass, and one of their crews would come under the overpass.
Wow.
So, law enforcement can't get down there,
Right.
right, unless they go on foot, but they get to the bottom of the overpass, they hop in another car, and off they go,
They're gone.
and they've always done that. That's one of the oldest getaway methods that
Wow.
we've seen, in my, 30 plus years of doing this. They've been doing that.
It's just mind blowing, honestly. I mean, guess, I see a lot of this stuff too, but like, I don't think people understand the complexity of like how, even like just with straight theft and the pilferage that they do, like at a truck stop and how they kind of, like we were talking about, like the X amount of miles that you should tell somebody to drive, but even that they're following people and
Yeah, nowadays, so, again, everything they do, Gary made a great point this morning, right? A year ago, it was we knew they were gonna send the stuff to cross docks.
mhm,
So then law enforcement and private industry adapt, and we
yep,
start keeping intel on cross docks and which cross docks are being used and where
building
they're going,
relationships.
building
Yep,
relationships with them. And they're calling. A lot of them were trying to help, and they would call law
yep,
enforcement. Hey, I have something suspicious, and law enforcement would come. So the bad guys have adjusted. So now it's box trucks, right? So
mhm,
now you're not. There's no location for you to go look for,
right,
right? They're pulling up, offloading everything into box trucks, and then truck leaves, they leave, and there's no place to go. So now you got to find the warehouse. Where are they keeping it?
yeah,
Right. But these are the adaptations that they make. And this is why I always say, for the love of Pete, stop putting all your
yeah,
solutions and what on social media
right,
sometimes. It's okay to talk about it and educate people, but you can't always let them know that you're on them. You can't always let them know what you're doing to prevent it
for sure.
or react to it, right? And I think I've always thought there's a responsibility there, and I know you know that, right? So
Yeah,
we've talked about that. There's a responsibility there. Like, we don't want to be people who help the bad guys
for
figure out the
sure.
playbook.
Which is
So
why it's so important to come to TAPA and come to the JJ's conference because I think that's where we actually can talk about all
that's where
this
we
stuff.
can talk about it. And could they be, spying on us, or, attending conferences and stuff like that? Sure, but we can only do what we can do,
Right,
right? So yeah, I think you got to go to the right places to share your knowledge and everything like that. But I think they continue to adapt. Um, that's one example. But the Trojan um, driver method,
mhm,
we talked about that, I think, on
yep,
the last one. That's an adaptation of how they get around vetting,
yep.
and this is what they do. They just continue to adapt and change and move and kind of bob and weave around what the industry does.
Yeah, and I think as an industry, that's why I love that we're kinda collaborating, working together, so a lot of different techs, and you and me have talked about this, where I think you should stack vetting techniques
Yeah,
and make sure that those talk to each other, and so you're not going to different spots and missing a big red sign. Because even, like, the Trojan driver thing, I've been talking to people about it, and I'm like, "Well, if we figure out a way to vet the drivers that come in, there's a way to have a network on that, and
yeah,
that takes the tech talking to each other too."
yeah.
So there's a lot we can do, as an industry on there. So with straight theft, and it was interesting yesterday whenever I saw the stats on there, which I know, like, I think it's a little skewed because I do think strategic theft's higher than what I think they only showed like 30% or something. But
Well, remember, so this is one of the reasons why whenever I present, I dive into the numbers
Yeah.
because if you don't really know, if you don't have a real full comprehensive picture of what's going on, you'll look at those numbers and
Yeah.
you'll just take them as they are at face value, right?
Right.
So Steve, I thought, did a great job talking through some of those numbers. But the point that I made sure that we covered was, yes, it said, I can't remember the exact number, let's say 30%
Hmm.
strategic theft, right? CargoNet does not put the MC fraud in the strategic theft category, which the rest of the industry, we consider that
Yeah.
part of, consider if they want to do that or whatever.
Right.
But so now you take that MC fraud and you put that in there and it's definitely going to be higher.
Right.
Right. So,
But straight theft is still definitely a big thing, and I think, educating drivers on that too. So, I know most of my listeners are brokers, but even being able, like, I remember as a broker, me talking to a driver whenever they were hauling a high value freight and just giving them that education. Maybe they didn't know, but I would always ask them, like, "Hey, have you ever hauled high value freight before? If you have, what are some tactics that you do to stay safe?" Because also, like, I've had a driver held at gunpoint before,
yeah.
and I mean, it's something as a responsibility as a broker or shipper to make sure drivers are safe too. And so I think being able to educate them, but having that, I like to first have the question of, "Hey, have you done this before? What are some tactics that you have?" And then gives me more of like a reassuring feeling, like, okay, this guy
Yeah.
is trying to protect my freight. He cares, and then I can maybe advise him on some other things. But
I have said this for years. I think when you're talking about straight theft, even some of the strategic theft,
hmm
right? But primarily straight theft, drivers are our best first line of defense.
yeah,
Um, all the years I did investigations, drivers were probably the most upset
yeah,
of everybody involved that they had a theft because they sincerely, I think most of them,
yeah,
uh, understand that they're being entrusted with somebody else's goods and they're very prideful about it and they
right,
don't want to be, and they don't make good victims, right? They don't want to
right,
be a victim. So I think what I've always said is, work with your drivers and educate them. Hey, I'm having you, like, think about the statistics we went over during the intelligence briefing. You have a 91% higher chance of being targeted for cargo theft if you're hauling a load out of California, 28% higher chance if you're hauling a load into California. So do you communicate that with the driver?
right,
Do you say it's going to be highly targeted because you're pulling this load out of California?
right.
And then do you point out like, hey, I know you probably want to get to Arizona before you stop the first time because the fuel prices are lower and everything like that.
hmm
And I've said to several of my clients, at SPG, hey, incentivize those drivers to not stop at the first truck stop
Yeah,
right across the border because the pilferage crews wait there, right? So
yeah,
can you incentivize their fuel discount? Can you give them better fuel discounts if they go just a little bit further to Williams, Arizona, or
yeah,
Flagstaff, Arizona, if they have the time on their
hmm
if they have the time to drive before they have to take their rest. So little things like that, working with them, educating them, talking to them about the fact that hey, right at that Arizona border, at
yeah,
all those truck stops, there's pilferage crews waiting there to hit your truck and pilfer while you're in the truck stop and things
yeah.
like that, or while you're sleeping in the cab. And I think when you educate them on those things, they tend to be your best defense against cargo theft.
Definitely. And I think also even whenever you are initially dispatching a driver, asking them, especially like if they are hauling something high value or high risk, hey, how much fuel do you have in your tank?
Yeah,
How many miles that typically make you go. And then that kind of gives you an idea of like, okay, this is probably where they'd stay or stop. And then if it is where they're like, oh, I'm gonna have to stop here, it's like, hey, I'll actually give you a little bit extra if you stop here instead of
yeah.
here. Because it's worth however
Well, and
much
there's a
extra money.
difference between fueling and stopping, right? Like,
Right.
okay, if you need to stop as soon as you get across the border and fuel, you're
Right.
not going to get 99% of the time, you're not gonna have a theft at the fuel pump,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, okay, fuel, and then go to Williams and take your break there,
Right.
or go to Flagstaff and take your break there, something like that, right?
Yeah.
If you can incentivize that in some way, and again, I know there's that you have to be careful with the vicarious liability, but
hmm
you're not demanding it, you're just asking, you're
Right.
incentivizing it, things like that. So,
And educating too, and I think even, like the Georgia, police that were here, they were talking about how some places in, like, South Atlanta are not the best places to go park, and it says it's secured lot, but it's not a secured lot. And I I think that is a big thing to say because a lot of people are like, I mean, I remember being a broker. I'm like, hey, where are you parking over the weekend? And they're like, oh, don't worry, it's a secure lot. And I get
Yeah.
the address and I look at Google Maps. I'm like, that thing is, there's not even a fence.
Well,
Like, what are you
Keith and I
talking about?
talk about that all the time. The fact that there's a statistic in the cargo theft numbers that says, that gives you the amount of theft at a secured lot
Mm,
has always been a problem for me,
yeah,
because if it was a secured lot, there wouldn't be a statistic for cargo theft
right.
at that location, right? So secured lot has always been a subjective term. You know, some people say, well, it had a lock on the gate or it had a gate,
Yeah, had a gate.
that's not a secured lot, right?
Right.
My definition of a secured lot, doing what I do, is going to be much different than the average
Totally.
person's definition of a secured lot. There are some, I don't know how you are about naming
Yeah, you can.
companies or whatever, but, like Truck Parking Club, y- they have several locations that they consider secure, and
Yeah,
they have security protocols around that, right? And then they have other ones that they're open, like these are not secure spots, these are just spots.
right.
Right, but you can look on their website and you can find ones
You
where
can
there are
filter it out, I
secure, and you
think,
can
right?
filter it out
Yeah,
and things like that. So we're seeing, the reason I mention them is because they're nationwide, and we're seeing companies like that start to grow because there's a need,
there's definitely a
right?
need.
And
Yeah,
then I know they're talking about, even at the lots that aren't secure, are there different ways that they can help with security,
interesting. Yeah,
right? Minor controls over ingress and egress, or locks, or things like that. So I think you're seeing, my point with that is you're seeing the industry kind of morph towards, how can we help, or how can we be involved? And that's a positive thing.
Definitely. And I think as a broker, I'm always big talk to your drivers, like I was kind of saying, and especially if you're dealing with that freight. So like if they are calling over the weekend, it's not like a straight run where they have time basically to park. Having that conversation, hey, where are you planning on stopping? Where are you going? What type of lot it is? What's your security protocol when you do drop your trailer? If it's not where you think it's on par, then maybe you don't hire them and make them load it, or
Right.
you educate them and say, hey, can you do this instead? I'm real big on that. And then I think what was interesting too is talking about having like seeing who's following you because that's definitely like a tale old as time.
Yeah.
It as a driver, you should be checking your mirrors and like, is this the same guy? And every turn I make, he's following me in
Yeah.
each lane or
Yeah. And then
whatever.
what do you do? So you need to
Right.
train the drivers on what to do. Who do you call?
Yeah.
How do you handle it? Things like that. And over the years, I've seen plenty of drivers do a really good job with that. Like, hey, I've had this, you know, SUV following me for
Yeah.
miles, and they call dispatch, but they also, dispatch will help them call 911, or they'll call 911 directly, things like that. So we've seen some good awareness. I think that's one of the old, to your point,
Yeah.
that's one of the oldest school methods. So I think
Right.
most drivers are aware, like, hey, you have to be aware of that. Now, you can get into habit, right? And so you don't really think about it
Yeah.
and everything like that. But, I think the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is, we see action versus reaction on the cargo thieves, getting back to adaptation, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about ELDs, right? So the ELDs come out. I think that, overall, you can argue it either way, but I think overall it's a positive for the
Right.
industry, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, I've always been a believer that the ELD mandate increased pilferage theft.
Makes
Be
sense.
Not intentionally, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But now you have a tracking device in the cab,
Yeah.
right? Essentially.
Right.
And so after that, we see more and more pilferage crews, because now it's like, hey, I don't want to take the. Now you combine that, it's not all on the ELDs. You also have advanced technology in tracking, and
Right.
more companies using tracking in the loads or in the trailers and
Yep.
stuff like that. But when you combine those two things, you had a certain segment of the cargo thieves say, I don't want the tractor and I don't want the trailer, because they both
Right.
probably or could have tracking in them. So I'll just take 2 pallets or 3 pallets off the back. I'll pull up behind you while you're sleeping or when you park
Yeah.
and go into the truck stop, and I'll take 2 or 3 pallets. And if they're targeting high-end electronics, which we know on that Arizona border they tend to target,
Right.
right? Now you're still getting $100,000
Right.
or
It's still worth
80,000
it.
or
Yeah.
$120,000, right? And now, so you take that, that's one reaction. The FMCSA has come out and said, hey, we're going to start cracking down on if you sell your MC number, right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem, and I applaud them for doing that.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, how will they know
Exactly.
that the
Exactly.
MC number was sold until somebody starts to steal with it,
Right.
right? And then people start to flag it
Right.
if the sale's not reported. So now what I'm wondering, will we see, instead of them buying the MC number and hauling legitimately for a few months and then doing a bunch more thefts,
Right.
which we've talked about in the past, will we see them say, hey, instead of taking the chance that the FMCSA figures out that this number's been sold, do we have to steal as many loads as we can as soon as we buy the MC number?
Hmm.
So will we see sort of a compression of the time frame
Yeah.
in which
Interesting.
they commit the thefts? And
Which
will
is
it
harder to
be
find.
as many as they can knock out in the first 2 to 3 weeks after they buy the MC number, so that they can get
Right.
as many loads before the MC number gets shut down?
Right.
Right. So you see this action versus reaction in the industry all the time. It could go all the way back to, 9/11. After 9/11, the ports were locked down. We don't see When I first started doing this, we saw cargo theft at the ports, right? It
Hmm.
was mostly pilferage, but we saw some cargo theft at the ports. After 9/11, almost no cargo theft at the ports. So where is
Okay.
it? Then it pushes it out. It pushes it to the outskirts of the
Interesting.
ports, where you have drayage companies that go in, pick up a load, and drop it just outside the ports. Well, I've always kind of said, tongue in cheek, that they create almost like a buffet line
Right.
of cargo outside the ports at the drop lots and things like that. So you see action versus reaction, and it can sometimes just drive changes in cargo theft, but it doesn't always solve
So I guess that's something I don't really know. I never did drayage, so I don't really know anything about that, honestly.
it.
But with drayage, is there like a decent percentage of stuff that does get stolen? And because I feel like even drayage carriers, they get vetted differently because they're not like they're just super short haul, almost like a
Well, the
LTL thing.
drayage
There's different.
carriers tend to be, they have TWIC cards to
Right.
get in and out. So you tend to get a
Better
a
carrier.
very well vetted carrier or driver that goes in and out of the ports and grabs it. The problem is, you know, what a lot of companies do for efficiency is they have a drop lot,
Mm-hmm.
or they rent space at a drop lot that's shared with multiple companies not far from the port, so
Yeah.
that they can have a certain number of TWIC card holding drivers just go in and out of the port, in and out of the port, and dropping them at
Yeah.
that location. So now, if it's multiple access lot, there's probably going to be no real control over ingress and egress, so the
Mm-hmm.
freight's just sitting there. So when you look at some of the areas outside of the ports in California in
Mm-hmm.
particular, and then also Savannah has seen a decent amount of that,
Okay.
where they just go and pick at those lots and they grab loads. Now those loads tend to be more of what I call a grab bag theft, because they don't necessarily know what's in them when they're
Mm-hmm.
in ocean containers. But nowadays, cargo thieves can move almost any freight that they steal. So
Right.
usually, whatever they steal, they can find a place to move
I mean, I think we've talked about this before
there.
too, even water bottles. I mean, they
Yeah,
can still make money off a couple $1,000s for hardly anything,
yeah.
any type of work.
Well,
Yeah.
remember, they have almost no overhead, right?
Right.
Like, that's what we talk about all the time, is their ROI is so much better than ours, because they don't have any of the manufacturing
Right.
costs, insurance costs, or anything. I mean, there's nothing
There's
for them.
nothing.
They have no
Yeah.
overhead.
And even if they do get in trouble, typically it's like hopefully that stuff changes. But
Yeah.
as of right now, it's kind of a slap on the wrist a little bit. Um, okay. Any other, I guess, modes that you can think of that are struggling with thefts that people should be aware of?
No, I think in the previous ones we've done, we've talked pretty much in general, covered most of them. And today we picked up on a couple, or talked about a couple more. I just think that the strategic theft, there's so many different methods right
Mm-hmm.
now. I find that to be one of the most common things that I get, is that I will go and speak someplace, and I get to the Q&A section, and somebody inevitably always stands up and says, "Hey, we had an incident," and they start trying to talk me through it, and they're confused. They don't
Right.
even really know how to describe it to me.
Yeah.
And I have to ask them 5 or 6 questions to kind of narrow down and say, okay, I think this is the method that you are
Yeah.
dealt with or are dealing with. And then I'll kind of walk them through what I think they can do to prevent it and everything like that. My point there is, there are so many methods.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about, let's say, if we just go with the raw numbers, right? If we say straight theft is still 65% of all cargo theft, I think, first of all, I think the industry loses track of that fact, right?
Yeah. I
When
definitely think
when you
that
think about it, you and I go to a lot of the same conferences,
all of it's
and it's
strategic.
always talking about strategic
Yep.
theft, right? But hey, by the way, 65% of all theft
Yeah.
is still straight theft. Well, why are we talking about the strategic theft? We're talking about it because there's so many methods, and it's so confusing and it's so hard to figure it
Totally.
out and anticipate it or try and defend yourself against it, that it makes it feel like it's the 65%,
Yeah.
even though it's not.
Well, especially for brokers, I think, because for them, that is the way that they could
In the
prevent
broker
it.
space,
Straight theft,
that's
they
what you're dealing with.
yeah,
If you're an intermediary, you're dealing with strategic
yeah, you're
theft.
not dealing with straight. I
Yeah.
mean, you
You
may deal
you
with the consequence of it getting stolen,
correct.
but you can't prevent it really.
You're third party to the straight theft,
Right.
right? But with the strategic theft, you're right in it,
Yeah.
right?
You're really you're really the reason why it happened a lot of
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
like you didn't do the right thing or whatever. You got spoofed. I mean, I talked about a story the other day because they're like, well, how did you get into wanting to learn about cargo theft? I'm like, well, I got totally duped and I thought I knew what I was doing.
Half the people
I was like blown
half the
away.
people, that's how they get into it, right?
Yeah.
Pachuca, who you've had on the show, we were talking about this yesterday, and he said, when he was in law enforcement, he never thought that he would end up doing cargo theft, but then he ended up being good at it and loving it and having a
Hmm.
great career. And he's considered, one of the top guys in the country at it. And my comment to him was, name one of us who thought we were going to do this
Yeah.
for a career, right? I never thought I was going to
Yeah.
do it. I kind of stumbled into it too, right? And I ended up being good at it and passionate about it and wanting to
Hmm.
do it. Same thing for you. When you
Yeah.
look at some of some of the different solutions that are out there, even some of the vetting platforms, like, if you look at, again, I'll just name a company, but
Hmm.
Verified Carrier,
Hmm.
they had a theft,
Yeah.
right? And so it the way he tells the story is, I just kept thinking about it for days. I couldn't get off it. And then I thought, how can I prevent it? And then
Yeah.
I came up with a way to prevent it. And then I said, hey, I can share this with the industry, right? And
Hmm.
so we see a lot of these
Totally.
solutions that come to the industry, or a lot of the people that come to these conferences, they're here because they experienced it
Yeah.
and they don't want to experience it again, or they want to help others not experience it. And I think that's a good way to build a community, to be honest with you.
Totally. Well, and it does make you be like one of the guys I talked to that's here. He was like, "Yeah, we've never had a theft, and last week we had three." And so I was like, "I got to go to TAPA's conference." Maybe it wasn't last week. I think it was 2 weeks ago. Anyways, it was during registration still.
Yeah.
But he's like, "I got to go because obviously what I've been doing all this whole time isn't working anymore."
That I see several companies who they go 5, 6, 7, 8 years, no theft.
Right.
And then they have a theft. And my comment to them is, you will be targeted
Yeah.
now going forward, because they share intel. The bad guys share
Yep.
intel. They sell it online, or they trade it online, or they give it to each other and they talk to each other. And a lot of times people don't necessarily believe me when I say that. They think, well, no, this is a one-off. We're pretty
Yeah.
good at this. And then inevitably, here comes another one, here comes another one. And it's exactly what you just said, which is,
Hmm.
what we were doing was great up until it wasn't.
Right.
And now, if we don't adapt and change and learn the new ways to prevent things and
Yes.
stuff like that, when you see, just to be fair on naming platforms and stuff like that, like, Michael Grace, he's always telling me what Highway's doing to try and adapt to and things like
Hmm.
that. So if you're not constantly adapting and changing,
Totally.
you're never going to keep up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I definitely think, and also if something does happen, the first step is not to look at a platform. I think it's to look at what your
What
process
you're doing.
is. And then if you are looking at a platform, you need to make sure that you're up to date on what that platform's doing.
Yeah.
Cause I don't really know. I think there was a couple out there that weren't making big changes.
Yeah.
But I don't know of anybody now that's stagnant. I think everybody is knowing that they have to advance and make changes.
Well, also knowing how to use the tools,
Right.
right? So I think first of all, you make a great point, and that's what TAPA is, right?
Hmm.
TAPA, we create the standards.
Yeah.
So we have the freight broker security requirements, which gives you, I always say, it gives you the foundation and the playbook, right, on exactly what you should have internally
Hmm.
first before you go out and purchase a platform or
Right.
purchase a technology or anything like that, right? Like, if you take gen logs, right? Like, how do you can look at it and you can go, hey, that's awesome,
Yeah.
right? Okay, slow down for a second.
Right.
Tell me how you're going to use it,
Right.
right?
100%.
Tell me how you're going to use it, because gen logs, verified carrier, highway, the Bannon report, you name it. None of them are out there saying, hey, we're the silver bullet. If you
No.
buy us, you won't have any more theft. None of them are doing that.
We wouldn't have cargo theft if that was the case.
Right. You can't we've talked about this. You can't run to technology
Yeah. Hmm.
and not pay attention to what you're doing internally, what your
Right.
process is. And one of the things we always talk about is one of the things we always talk about is training your frontline staff. No different
Mhm.
than when we talked about the drivers, right? But if you're in that freight broker space, a lot of times what I find when I first start dealing with one of my clients, we offer where I am at SPG, we offer free consultations with our clients. Myself, Gary, we're going to work with the clients and evaluate what are they doing, what's your process, what's your procedures, and everything like that,
Which is huge. A lot of
which
ones don't do that.
which is huge.
Yeah.
But what I find a lot when I go to work with those companies is there's three people in the company that have all the knowledge
Yeah.
about cargo theft, right? It's like the head of risk, the head of security, and one other
Mhm.
person, or it's just two people, or it's one person. And my first comment is, how many of you are brokering loads?
Yeah.
Oh, none of us. Okay, well, it's the people that are brokering the loads that need to
100%.
know all of this. You need to
Right.
train them on the red flags. You need to incentivize it. You need to create a culture. I always say you have to create a culture that feels like you're playing a sport, right?
Yeah.
Where
Everyone's winning.
you have everybody up on your team psyched up that they don't want to lose to the bad
Yeah.
guys. Hey, how are we going to beat the bad guys? And then when somebody who's brokering loads raises their hand and said, "Hey, I think I got a bad guy here,"
Yep.
and I stopped it, you need to highlight that. You need to stand that person up in
Totally.
front of the team and say, "Tell us how you figured it out. Tell us what red flags."
Yeah.
Relate it back to the training that we gave you, things like that. And that's like one of the things I do is I will go into a client and I will literally rotate their entire staff through one conference room all day so they don't have to take everybody off the floor
Right,
at
right.
once. And I will train them all on red flags, right? And
Yeah.
inevitably, a week or two later, I get an email, "Hey, we stopped two thefts or we stopped a theft." And it's
Mhm.
it's really not that hard,
Right.
right?
Right. I totally agree, why I'm glad we're doing this too, because I think it's an easy way to like, hey, you're new while you're driving to and from work, listen to this little series and you'll understand what's
Yeah,
going on. Because you're right, they definitely like even at the conferences, it's never really like a carrier sales rep that's here
that's right.
ever. They're never
That's right.
here.
Right.
It's always a manager
Or
or compliance
drivers. We don't
manager.
see a lot of drivers.
No, not at all.
We have a handful. We have a couple that are in here, which is great to see. But you know,
Yeah. And to me, I think you should be sending at least because even if you let's say if you did like the compliance manager and like one carrier sales rep, that one can share because you have a different perspective as a rep coming from being a
yeah, I
rep.
think they relate better, right? So
Yeah. And you can take little tidbits of like,
yeah,
oh, they said this, but actually I would apply it this way because
yeah.
this is what I hear on the
Yeah,
phone.
and it's not practical to say, well, somebody should bring all their drivers
Right.
or somebody should bring all their agents or things like that, but you can bring 1 or 2
Yeah.
and get them the training, and almost every company operates on kind of a train the trainer thing, but
Right.
my point is, make sure you're going back and training the frontline
For
people
sure.
on what you learned here at the TAPA conference.
Yeah, 100%. Well, everybody should be part of TAPA and learn all the things that,
Thank you.
like, one big thing I've learned, even just from being here now, I'm like, I mean, just the knowledge base and, you never can not learn. And like I said, having the police officers here was, I think, the best thing about any
Yeah, it
conference is
was
whenever
great.
they have that.
It's
It's
great.
just, you got to have that network.
Yeah.
And then, after our series I'm doing where I have some officers coming on the show because I think it's good to know as a broker or shipper, whoever, what information do they need to go
Yeah.
find these guys? Because
That's a
that's
huge thing. Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge.
Because if you're not getting the right info, they can't do anything.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyways, well, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it. This has been great.
Yeah.
Yeah.